Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to add player movement to our game. So for the time being, we're not going to have an actual character, we're just going to be moving the camera around, which is the way most first-person games work. You might have a character behind the camera, but there doesn't necessarily have to be if you don't actually ever see the player. We'll work on making a character in a later game. This one we're just going to be moving around the camera instead of the player. So what we're going to do, first make sure that your camera gets moved to where the actual ground is, because in the previous video we had it like up in the air and we had it angled down. You're going to want to get rid of that angle and you're going to want to lower it somewhere in the middle of that area. Also, I want to mention that if this looks different, it's because I had to recreate the project from scratch in Unity 2020.1. I was using 2019.2, but I decided that this is good time as ever to show you the new input system. So I tried to upgrade Unity 2019, and what happened is it broke Unity. So all of our stuff was fine, our models, our script, everything was fine, but the UI itself would not work. So I just recreated the project from scratch in 2020. Took about 30 minutes because I just followed my own instructions. You didn't have to rewrite the code. You could just copy and paste, keep the names of the script the same, that kind of thing. So in short, if you're using 2020, you're fine. If you're using 2019 like me, probably going to have to recreate because I don't know if the input system works in 2019. Certainly you feel free to give it a shot. So speaking of that, even though it's compatible with 2020, for whatever reason, it is not installed by default. So the first thing you have to do is install that. You go to Window, you go to Package Manager, and this seems to change every few updates. So you might have to change this to Packages Unity Registry. So that's everything that Unity themselves own and promote. And you'll come down here to Input System, and there'll be a button here that says Install. I already did. I don't want to waste your time. So I already installed it. You just click on Install. It'll take a minute or two, and then the input system will be installed. So at that point, you're ready to get started. So you right-click down here. You're going to click on Create. You're going to click on Input Actions, and then you're going to get this. So let's call this all inputs. Or all input. Now, as you can see, this is selected, and this is what you see here in the inspector. We're going to use this in just a couple minutes. So first, we open this up. So what you do is you actually create mapping. So you create a category and then the actual keys or gamepad or whatever that's going to do that control. So for action map, you click on this. You can call it whatever you want. Let's call this player con. It's player control. You have to be careful. Certain words, I believe, are protected. Like I think player input might be protected. So you got to be careful. So we'll call it player con. The new action, we'll rename this. We'll call this player move. Okay. And now what we need to do is over here, we don't want a button action type. We need to change this to value. And for control type, we're going to do any. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to select the left and right analog sticks as objects. You'd only be able to select the individual directions. So we expand this. You can see it says there's no bindings for a player move. So we click on this. We click on the drop-down arrow. Sorry. Meant to click gamepad. And then as you can see, there is left stick and right stick. That's what we're going to use. So for this one, it's left stick, and then we're going to rinse and repeat. So we create a new one. We'll call this player rotate. This 2 needs to be a value. This 2 needs to be any. We're going to, with the no bindings selected, because again, it's saying that there's no bindings to do whatever we're going to use player rotate for. So we need to choose right stick. So the left stick will be for whatever player move does. The right stick will be used for whatever player rotate does. Now, obviously, the name gives away what we're going to use it for, but it's just important to note that calling it move and rotate in and of itself means nothing. It's for you, the designer, to know what you're going to use that for. So we do save asset, and then we come over here, like we said, it's in the inspector. It's selected in the asset area, so we're looking at it in the inspector. We're going to click on Generate C# class. This is actually going to create a new script which you're not going to do anything with. The system itself will be referring to it and referencing it. And we click on, we'll accept the defaults, and we click on Apply. You don't have to memorize this or anything, but you're going to want to, generally speaking, you're going to want to remember that we have this kind of mapping because you're about to see this again in a few seconds in the coding. So let's close this. So now what we need to do, we're going to go to our main camera, and we're going to add a character controller. So we have the camera selected. We're going to Physics, and we're going to choose Character Controller, and we can leave all the default settings. Likewise, we're going to add a script. So right-click, Create, C#, and we'll call this Camera Con for camera control. We again click on Main Camera, and we put Camera Con on that object. Now let's go ahead and open that script. And we're going to do a few things. We need another namespace. So using Unity Engine dot input system. If you don't do that, it won't recognize some of these commands. You can get rid of this line because this is a remark statement. It is not executed. You can tell by the 2 forward slashes. So it's just a remark. It's internal documentation and nothing else. Next, we need to add some variables. And to prevent this video from getting too long, I'm going to do a little bit more copying and pasting than what I normally do. Some people have said that they would prefer that rather than seeing me type and make mistakes, so that's understandable. So just pause the video, whatever you need to do, but I will paste this, but we'll then walk through it. Okay, so what we're doing here, first line, so this is what we just pasted. All input. It's not a coincidence that that is called all input. So this is referring to that. We are going to say that an all input type variable controls. So we're going to get back to that in a minute. So in other words, if we want to refer to all input, we're going to use the word controls. Second of all, we're going to create a vector too, so X and Y, and that's going to be named move. So it's a vector2 variable move, and this is going to be a vector2 rotate cam. So again, rotate, cam, and move are just to be meaningful to you, the programmer. It means nothing to Unity. It does not inherently mean that something is going to move or rotate. We're just letting ourselves know that that's what we're going to do with those vector2. And then public character controller, the player. So over here on our main camera, we added our camera controller. Now, it might seem redundant, but we need to reference it. So we take the character controller and we put it there, and then we'll be able to make changes to the camera controller. And now for the big paste. So we'll just highlight these. We'll paste this. Like I said, don't let this intimidate you. We'll break it down to every section. So this is what we had up to this point. Everything else is new. So, void awake. So as we said that we're making a reference to all input. And again, it's not a coincidence that this is all input. And we're saying that we need a new one of it. We need an instance of it. That's just the way it works. Now what we're doing, we're going to drill down into that instance. So we said all inputs. Okay, so is controls. Now we're just drilling down. So again, that pattern, player con, player move. Now this is a command, so these first three are all dependent upon what you name it, but at this point it's now a command. It's performed. We need to capture the context. We're going to take that value and we're going to put it into the move variable, and it's context.readValue vector2. I don't particularly like this syntax because to me that looks like it says it's equal than or greater than. It's actually being functionally used like an arrow. It's saying take this and put it here. Why they didn't use a pipe is beyond me, because the pipe symbol usually meant take something on the left and put it into the right, such as the value from this application into this other application. So we're taking the context and we're putting it into the variable. Okay, so this is what's doing the translation of analog stick into variable. It's capturing those numbers. And then you just have to look for it to be canceled. So again, controls, player con, player move, canceled, context, set this to 0. So again, just like if you're using the old control scheme, you would have to adjust whether or not there's still movement happening. So you want that vector2 to be set back to 0. And then it's just rinse and repeat for the next mapping, player rotate. So controls.playerCon, player rotate, and then the same too. Is it being performed? Take the context, put it into rotate cam, and here's the formatting of it. Control, player con, player rotate, canceled, set that value to 0. So here we're using the move variable, here we're using the rotate cam variable. Here we're using the player move mapping, here we're using the player rotate mapping. Unfortunately, I don't know of any cleaner way to do it, so that's what we've got. Technically, you could get rid of start at this moment because we're not using it, but we'll leave it. Or you can delete it. Either way, at this moment, we don't need it. Now, the update section. This is going to be a little bit messy to look at, okay? But we now need to take these vector2s, so this, and apply it to the camera. But there's a few things that need to be done. Very often when you refer to the x-axis or the z-axis, you're referring to the global x, z, and y, okay? The problem is an object has its own relative x, z, and y. So if you're saying move along the z-axis of you move along the z-axis in the world coordinate system, but your character is facing, say, up, it's facing the y along the y-axis. If you're moving along z, you're basically strafing while you're looking up. So in other words, you're not moving in the direction that you're facing. So you can't just say move z, move x, move y. You have to make a few adjustments so as that the direction the cube is moving is in consideration of the direction it's facing. Okay? There are times that you might want to make your character strafe, but generally speaking, if you're pushing forward, you're pushing up on that left analog stick, you expect your character to move in the direction you're facing. Just like if you pull back, you push down, you expect it to move away from the direction you're facing. So you can't just say, drop this into X, Y, and Z. You need to adjust for that. You need to adjust for the direction it's facing. Okay? So how do we do that? Well, we're going to create a new variable, vector3, because if you recall, these are vector2s. Well, here's the thing. Again, like we said, if you're pressing forward on the controller, you want your character to move forward. You don't want them to move up. So if we just use the vector2, your character would move up along the y-axis, and we don't want that. We want them to move forward along the z-axis, or to be more specifically, the relative z-axis. You want them to move forward based on the direction that the object is facing. Okay? So that's why we have to move these variables around. So vector3, we'll just call it m. And what we'll say, we want m to be equal to transform.right times move.x and plus transform.forward times move.y. Okay, so we are moving right according to the X, and we're moving forward. So in other words, we're not moving up, like I said. By default, if you're using the Y axis, you're moving up and down. We want Y to move forward. So I don't think I explained that very well, but again, you always want to be moving relative to the direction the object is facing. So you're always moving right or you're moving forward. And you could say, well, what if I'm moving left? If this is a negative, then you'll move left. So just like this, move forward, it'll also move back. So it's a little bit messy to look at, but even though it says right, it'll be left and right. Even though it says forward, it'll be forward and back. And again, it's what we're stuck with. So it's a bit messy, but that's what we need. Now, the player, as we set up here, is the character controller. .move, that's just a command that can be used with character controllers. There's that variable that we said we just created. We're going to times it by an arbitrary amount so as that it moves at a good speed, because the default, the raw value coming out of X and Y, it's ranging between -1 and +1. Well, a 1 velocity is only 1 unit per second, so that's kind of slow. So we're moving that up to 5. And then we want to adjust by delta time, time.delta time. Why? Because update happens every single frame. So if you have a very slow computer, less frames per second. A very fast computer, more frames per second. So delta time basically adjusts for that. It says how much time has passed. So if very little time has passed, then that means this is being multiplied by a very small number and gets shrunk. Whereas if a lot of time has passed, because it's a slower frame rate, then this is a bigger number, and this is being multiplied by a bigger number, and it'll be a greater change per frame. So that's the move, okay, because we're doing two things. We said we're moving with the left controller, the left analog stick, and we're rotating with the right analog stick. So that means we now have to handle the rotation. So transform.rotate vector3.up. So again, we're not expressly saying Z and X and Y. We're saying relative direction. So up, what is up for the object this is attached to? Remember, if you're doing this, if you're doing transform and there's nothing before it, then you're saying whatever this object is attached to, do this to it. Well, that's what we're doing. Where this is attached to the camera, so the camera is going to be rotated up. So vector3.up times rotate cam. So very important. Rotate cam, as we said, is here for the rotate mapping, whereas this is using M, and M is using move, which is for the left analog stick. So got to make sure that you're using the correct ones. Okay, and let's see, we just need to change this. It's not called player movements, it's just called player con. This was from an earlier version. Player con. Unsurprisingly, I had to do this in several takes because this is a new system. So this is basically just housekeeping. Enable, disable, you just have to do it. I'm not going to bother explaining it. It's housekeeping. So again, you're drilling down to controls, player con, but you stop there. You just say it's enabled or disabled. And again, just think of it as housekeeping. It really doesn't functionally change anything. So type it out and move along. So that should do it. Again, I pasted this in because people have asked me not to just type every little thing out, and I probably would have made a lot of mistakes, particularly because this kind of syntax is very new to me, because again, this is a new control scheme. This is a new input system. Okay, so if I have not made any mistakes, fingers crossed, this should work. There's left, there's forward, there's back, there's rotate. So rotating is fast. Now this is what I'm talking about. So I'm going to rotate this way. If we didn't say forward and I just used the Z-axis, I'd move to the right. So I'd have moved like that. Okay, so I'm pressing on the right. But because I said use forward, if I press forward, I move in the direction that I'm facing. So unfortunately, no shortcuts. You really have to declare whether you're moving forward or you're up or you're moving right. Now, you probably noticed something. You can't rotate up and down. I specifically did not do that yet. I thought that this was quite enough for one video because when it comes to the up and down, there's additional things that have to be taken into consideration. For instance, you don't want to totally flip over backwards, okay? So we have to constrain the angle that you can look up and down. So you may only want to look up 45 degrees and look down 45 degrees. You don't want to flip over. Okay, so that's why I don't want to do that in this video because that's separate controls you have to put into place. And you also have to worry about other things about is your character being nudged. So you want to be able to look up and down. So you want to be able to look up and down. Okay, you want to rotate left and right. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to rotate on the z-axis. Why would you want to rotate like that? You would do that in maybe a first-person or third-person shooter. You know how some games you can kind of like lean over and look around a corner? Well, you don't want to do that. So what would happen is it's like you've got a crook in your neck or something. So you don't want this to rotate to the left. You don't want this to rotate on the z-axis, okay? Or at least the relative z-axis. So there's a few things that we can do as far as freezing the rotation, but like I said, I think that this was quite enough complexity. This actually gives you a very solid controller, so you can move forward, you can move back, you actually can do the strafing by moving left and right, even with this, and you've got the rotating left and right. Rotating is kind of fast, so you might want to slow that down. Moving is kind of slow, and that's one other thing that I want to mention. So for the movement, we used a constant. We used a number. You're probably going to want to, in your game, use a variable. Why? Because depending on what the character is doing, you're going to change the speed. So for instance, maybe they have a speed boost. Well, if they have a speed boost, you need this to move faster, so you'd bump that up to 10. Or maybe they're walking through mud, and so you bring it down to a 2. So in your final game, this will probably be replaced with a variable, and then that variable will just have different values depending on, again, do they have a speed boost, a speed buff, do they have a debuff, that kind of thing. So I think that's it for this video. I think that's quite enough. Let me know if you like this approach to just pasting everything in and then explaining it, or if you'd rather have it one line at a time. I did not skip anything, so each section has been explained. But again, I'm trying to balance how long the video is. And people have complained that they don't like to see me type, and I understand, particularly if I make mistakes. So just let me know in the comments if you'd rather me go back to typing each line out or if you'd prefer this. And I think that's about it. So in the next video, we'll look at adding the vertical rotation, putting in the controls that you don't flip all the way around and that you don't rotate on the z-axis. And we will probably also change right now on yours, the mouse click probably doesn't work anymore because when you install the new input system, it disables the old input system. So unless you specifically went back in and said, okay, use both systems, the mouse click wouldn't work anymore for you. So it still works for me because I think I did it before the video was running. When I installed the input controller, I did what I just said, that I went in and I set it so it would accept both. No point doing that because, like I said, in the next video, I'm just going to show you how to accept the new control. So, okay, I hope that this was helpful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.